Sri Lanka should be ecstatic at their series win against India, because in recent times, almost every occasion they've played a team as good as them, or better, they've been dog shit, wrapped in cigarette butts found on a roadhouse bathroom floor. So this is big for them, especially without all their best players. But bilateral cricket isn't considered as important anymore. When teams are resting their main players and starting to try anyone who ever bowled spin at high school in their 11s, we know this is no longer the pinnacle of ODI cricket. And in some ways, this was Sri Lanka versus an Indian experiment. However, we've also seen how England, Australia, and even India dominate some series without their best players trying some new things. And that is what Sri Lanka did. They also did not have Patharana or Madhushanka or Chimera. In fact, I'm not sure they had any fast bowlers. Shayan didn't play the first two games, and Hasaranga didn't play the last two. So what does this series all mean? Usually, I wouldn't even be that interested in a bilateral series. In fact, if you've been to this channel, you know, bilateral ODIs and T20s, I usually sleep through, especially when the Olympics is on. But this one kept dragging me back in, not specifically because of the cricket, although wasn't like every game a tie at one point, but more to do with the fact that there was a lot of future narrative things going on here. Like, can India not play spin anymore? Is Sri Lanka a much more powerful side who's just been underperforming at major tournaments? And is this loss actually a victory for India and also a victory for Sri Lanka at the same time? As I said, none of this would usually matter all that much, but with two ICC tournaments in Asia coming up, this was an interesting series, or a couple of series I suppose, on many levels. So is this the rare bilateral series where things actually mattered? You want to swing wildly at the internet like you've got the new pill in your hand, but you keep getting dead battered. Find the movement you want with NordVPN. They are our protection against terrifying cyber threats and wide-battered geo-blocks. NordVPN will help you get through any rights restrictions so you can watch all the cricket you want. We aren't always happy the wickets were on. Sometimes we need a change. NordVPN can switch your virtual location so your IP address is ready to cash in. So if you need to get around the internet's rules, or I suppose in our case laws, select NordVPN. They can help you watch a game on a cheaper stream in another country. Give NordVPN the ball and let them penetrate all your vast internet issues. Because if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. You can also receive a 20GB daily data voucher. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a big hitter is coming for you at nordvpn.com/KIMBER right now. Let's start with the fact that Rohit Sharma made all of India's runs, 157 of them while striking at 141. Maybe he thought he was still actually playing T20s and never retired from that. The second highest scorer, though, was Akshar Patel. Considering India had so many batters in each team, they also had so few runs. Kuldeep Yadav faced 67 balls, except this time, unlike the India versus England Test series, it wasn't, good news. And a lot of these ODIs followed a very similar pattern, with India getting pummeled with the ball early, not taking any wickets, then taking 6 wickets with a score somewhere around like 140. Then the Sri Lankans would fight back and get a decent, if not inspiring, total. India would go nuts in the power play, thanks to Rohit. And then batting became a lot harder after the first 10 overs, and eventually the Sri Lankan spinners completely took over. But this series is not really about the result, it's what these teams took out of it. Sri Lanka have played 21 bilateral ODI series against India in their history, and this is only their 3rd series win. And it's their first since December 1997. That feels like an awfully long time ago. Dunath Wellalage was the player of the series, and he obviously quite deserved to be. He scored 124 runs with a true average of +10 and was slightly down on true strike rate. But he took 9 wickets with a true economy of .04 and obviously was very good at taking wickets in that series at .65 above what we would expect. The 21-year-old all-rounder brought them back into the game on both sides of the ball. And of course, this isn't even the first time he performed against India. He almost stole an Asia Cup game against them last year, and he now has Rohit Sharma and Virat Kohli out 5 times in ODIs. In fact, he has a lot of good batters in his pockets already. I think the last 50 over World Cup was probably a little bit too early for him, but maybe the next one, or the Champions Trophy or the T20 World Cup, might come at close to the right time. And like a bride, Sri Lanka had something old and something new. Their leg spinner, Jeffrey van der Say, debuted in 2015, and he's only played 24 matches since, despite the fact that he is old enough to be Wellalage's dad, right? There's only been 2 years where he's featured in more than 5 matches. 6 in 2017 and 7 in 2022. But he did play a part in Sri Lanka's series win against Australia at home in 2022, one of their other rare victories. And while no one's expecting him to suddenly become a star, him being in this side or being around this side is suddenly a very important thing because Sri Lanka has a potentially great bowling lineup, despite the fact we almost never see it because someone's always injured. Well, having him actually available and fit and able to bowl at times as a backup or even as a frontliner in certain situations is a huge thing to have. On top of that, they also have their captain Asalanka's bowling. At the moment, he has 11 wickets in his career and 10 of those have come against India, which is just fun. But if he can be handy in Asian conditions, that gives him some chop-out bowling from the top 5 position, which again, with Hasaranga and Wellalage's all-round potentials, gives you even more options throughout that team to have a very flexible lineup, which they haven't had in a very long time. Another positive for Sri Lanka was that they made some runs. Now, of course, again, their batting order didn't completely work because their batting order doesn't work. But they had a lot of different batters put their hands up at various points in the 3 ODI matches. Wellalaga and Nasanka got 50s in the first game, 5 batters crossed 30 in the second, and Avishka missed out on 100 by just 4 runs in the third. Now, it's not a lot of runs, but remember, this was pretty tough conditions all the way through. They certainly weren't what you would consider standard ODI wickets. So Sri Lanka needed to problem solve to play the conditions, which they did effectively. They also found a way to make runs even when they had lost wickets. I mean, it was shaky, don't get me wrong, but there was something nice in this, and it's been a long time since we've looked at Sri Lanka's batting and thought there's anything nice going on. Now, it did help that they batted first. It might have been a very different series if they hadn't, but either way. What about India? The main question has to be, do they have issues against spin? Suddenly this is the claim, and let's be honest, it needs a forensic look. But right at the moment, I could say this. They averaged 54 in ODI cricket during their 2010s when facing spin, and they average 44 now. So part of the reason it looks like they are playing worse against spin is because in the previous decade, they were probably the greatest players of spin we had ever seen consistently in ODI cricket. Certainly the greatest run-scoring team against spin in ODI cricket. But I don't think that means that India can't continue to look at ways of getting better. And in the post-match press conference, Rohit brought up the fact that they don't sweep or reverse enough. Rahul Dravid has also mentioned this before. But Rohit also said that these are players who've played a lot of cricket and that they have to have their individual game plans. I think that's a smart way of looking at it. But I would also be using this series to have a look if there's ways for India to get even better at spin. Because it's not like people in India have forgotten how to play spin. But facing spin bowling now is very different than it was when the VJs or Sunil Gavaskar were playing. And conditions also play a big part. Indian batters were terrific against spin in the 2023 World Cup, but they have also lost an ODI series against Bangladesh in December of 2022. And in fact, when they're playing spin, it's Sri Lanka and Bangladesh specifically that they have a problem. So they may not have a problem facing spin, they may have a problem with excessive spinning wickets or special kinds of spinning wickets. And another reason they might have slipped back is in the previous decade, they had Rohit Sharma and Virat Kohli at the peak of their powers. They would milk spin for fun at good strike rates. And remember, they also weren't trying to go quite as fast in those days because India had a theory of keeping wickets until the end. So they were milking spinners, whereas now the common thing is to go after spinners in the middle a lot more. And Rohit is doing that. I mean, he has stopped milking the cows and he is just rugby tackling them to the ground. So if you tack more, you obviously take more risk and your overall average should generally come down. Virat Kohli is certainly a player who doesn't sweep, and when he started his career, I don't think that would have been as much of an issue. But as spinners are getting faster and faster, it's getting harder to use your feet and come down. And when he was at his best, I don't think this would have mattered as much either, but he is getting on a little bit. I thought his slog sweep in the IPL seemed like a really positive move of a cricketer just thinking, okay, how do I get ahead of the game again? It's worth remembering that India did not have Jasprit Bumrah or Mohammad Shami. But the seamers still didn't have a great series. Mohammad Siraj took 3 wickets at an economy of more than a run a ball, and Arshdeep had 2 dismissals, again at more than a run a ball. In fact, India ended up conceding 65, 79 and 70 in the final 10 overs of all 3 matches, despite often taking a lot of wickets. And it could have been much worse. But Riyan Parag took 3 wickets on his debut, bowling 9 overs. And he was a big reason why Sri Lanka didn't end up posting more than they eventually did. We haven't seen him bowl all that much in the IPL. But he was the second highest wicket taker for East Zone and their top scorer in the Deodar Trophy. I think his utility, I don't think he's ever going to be like an all-rounder. right? But maybe what he will give you is that sort of Varun Sehwag-like thing where you can bowl a couple of overs, especially against favourable matchups or unfavourable conditions. He's also quite an interesting bowler in that I'm not sure his best ball is ever going to be fantastic, but in a way, like Jarrod, he's got many different kinds of deliveries. And again, if he can be a part-timer who can try a bunch of different tricks, that's a handy person to have in your top 6. Washington Sundar had a good series with the ball. He was even promoted to bat at 4 in the first match. And this was another thing I thought was really interesting from India, is that they were promoting random people to bat up the order at different times. Sundar is still a project player. Like, he might be 2 or 3 years away from what he will end up as a cricketer. A lot of young all-rounders come into international cricket because they have so many skills, but it takes them a lot longer to work on those skills because they have to work on batting and on bowling. Rohit Sharma started this series by saying it wasn't like a practice run for them or anything, and in the post-match interview after the third ODI, he dismissed the idea of them being complacent. He backed his team and said that the odd series loss does not take away from any of the consistency over the last few years. But as I've said before, I actually think India should be losing more of these bilateral series. And I don't care whether they were complacent or not. I'm sure that the 11 players out on the field were doing everything they could to win the game. But I also think that the management of the Indian team was trying some things. It was an experimental thing. And if you are a bilateral monster the way that India has, and you have struggled at major tournaments, they should be using bilateral games to experiment. I love the game where they had Washington at batting at number 9. I like the idea of Rian Parag trying to be the 5th bowler in these sorts of conditions. Push and squeeze and twist the teams as much as you can because you will learn a lot more. And this series I think was really interesting because there are 2 ICC tournaments coming up, the Champions Trophy and the T20 World Cup, that are going to be in Asian conditions. So you can use this series as a doodle pad, and I think they kind of did. But what about Sri Lanka? Because it's also really important from them. They've been poor in quite a few World Cups in a row now. And we all know how well their bowling could be when fully assembled because we've seen all the parts individually. But it's never quite worked, especially against the better teams. And often they have hidden behind key injuries. This series, they had a bunch of incredible bowlers out and they still stood up. And the reason this was such an interesting series, or 2 series, is because both teams actually got something out of this. Sri Lanka just needed to win against the better side, and India wanted to test their versatility and some wacky lineups. Win-win. This should be the future of bilateral series. Fact-finding missions with teams trying to get something important out of them. And of course, every bilateral series should have an old leg spinner taking wickets. For me, that is the ultimate dream. I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories, like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with, and also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the Empire, but what happens when those nations grow up and get good at it? Find Overthrowing Cricket's Empire on Amazon today.